before we move to Iran for a couple of minutes, I mean, what everybody always goes to, and in some ways, maybe this is our own international selfishness, that anytime something happens in South Asia, there's all these incredible intricacies that implicate so many people and such dynamic politics in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. But it always sort of ends up at some point of like, is this going to escalate to the point where there's some type of actual serious military exchange between India and Pakistan, which would obviously, have ramifications for the rest of the world. What is your read on the appetite of the Indian and Pakistani governments in terms of actually allowing this to escalate beyond the crisis it already is?
I don't think there's any sense that there will be a war. Okay. I mean, the Pakistan General High Command has basically said so. And I also think it's important to understand that here the Chinese have changed the situation in South Asia. The appetite is much greater for greater infrastructure than for war. I think that this is quite a significant qualitative change in very many parts of Asia. I feel like this is what is going to turn the clock in Afghanistan as well. The moment people in Afghanistan see that the Chinese are going to show up and build big roads and connect Afghanistan with the rest of the world, that they will see, well, maybe this is a better idea. I mean, I just want to put forward that it's been a long time in parts of Asia. It's been far too long where there's been no uniting project that is not something to do with war. And the Chinese have, for all their flaws, put that project forward.
Right. With Iran, we've seen the Trump administration tear up the deal, even though every observer, including our own U.S. State Department and so on, confirmed that Iran was following the deal down to the T. The Europeans were angry, but there isn't necessarily any sort of muscle behind that anger. And now we've seen this kind of cycle of tension in terms of these ship seizures. What do you see as the dynamic between the United States, Iran, and Europe right now?
It's related to our previous conversation about India, because again here, the Europeans are a test case of spinelessness. The Europeans know that the deal that was, after a great set of compromises by all sides, the deal that was struck in 2015 is a very good deal. The Europeans know that. They tell you that quite openly. Secondly, the Europeans know that the Iranians have not violated the deal. And as you say, so does the US State Department. In fact, so does the CIA. Everybody knows the deal was not violated. Thirdly, the Europeans are desperate for Iranian oil. There are other main avenues for oil or natural gas from Russia, from Libya. These have been compromised by sanctions, by very stupid wars. So the Europeans are desperate for Iranian oil. They tried to create a mechanism to be able to pay for Iranian oil around US sanctions. So for these three reasons, the Europeans know the deal was good, Europeans know the Iranians haven't violated the deal, and the Europeans are desperate for oil. You would think that in a rational world, European social democracy and so on would stand up and say that the United States leaving this deal is ridiculous. I mean, they would come beyond the United States and be sharply critical. When the US government decided to sanction Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, in a normal world, you would have expected the foreign ministers of Europe and the European Union's foreign chief, for now, Federica Mogherini, you would have expected all of them to come out in public and said, this is outrageous. All that happened was they released a very mild statement saying, we will continue to meet Mr. Zarif. Really, is that the best you can do? I mean, this spinelessness of the center is what is crippling the world today. We need to say this. It's easy to say, where's the left? What's the left not doing? This is not a problem of the left. This is a problem of a center that has been dissolved into jelly.
So what was the rationale? I mean, just elaborate on the sanctions against Jawad Zarif, because that is really the height of the aggressiveness and the absurdity of the Trump line and the spinelessness of the Europeans. I mean, and I'm not making a value judgment here. I don't want sanctions against anybody. It was a great deal. Things are moving forward and so on. But when someone when someone comes forward and they say, oh, well, we sanctioned some, commander in the Republican, in the Republican Guard or whatever. Okay, this makes it inside a certain logic. This is sort of part of the kind of conflict zones in the Middle East. Javad Zarif, no one has done more to try to soothe all of these tensions and move forward diplomatically.
Well, Mr. Zarif was educated almost entirely in the United States. He speaks fluent English. He's an extremely bright and well-prepared person. Let's just put that out there. You need to have Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on your show. You need to ask him why he's jealous of Mr. Zarif. I asked somebody in the U.S. State Department, what's the story here? Because I wrote a piece about this. Well, he told me, look, let's be frank. Zarif has been doing the U.S. talk shows, and the Trump administration is frustrated. Mm-hmm. They can't stand the fact that this guy is so good. And, partly, let's say it, he's right in what he's saying. It's not just that he's a good, spin doctor. He has truth on his side. I mean, it's not only that he's a good messenger, his message is good. And Trump apparently and Pompeo just can't stand that. In a monarchy, sometimes you have to look at the caprice of the monarch. You don't have to understand structure and, you don't have to understand the context. It's just the monarch's attitude. That's how I like to read the Saudi Arabian situation, for instance. There's a lot of internal bizarreness. When the monarch says something, you have to do it. I mean, there's no checks and balance. In some ways, this Trump-Pompeo, policy on Zarif feels monarchical. There's no rational explanation to sanction the foreign minister of a country who's willing to negotiate with you. You can't on the one side say, we want to negotiate a better deal, and then sanction the only person who's able to negotiate this deal. The supreme leader of Iran made a very good comment. He said, you want to negotiate? Zarif is the only person you're going to negotiate with. There's nobody else. He said that openly.
Right.
So the fact of this sanction on Zarif indicates one of two things. One, this government is totally comical, farcical, doesn't understand the way in which diplomacy works. They are being motivated, in a sense, by jealousy or whatever. That's one. Second thing is, actually, this is their path to war. They really don't want to negotiate anything. That eventually, when the timetable, perhaps an electoral timetable, suits them, they'll do some sort of bombing raid on Iran. It's only one or the other explanation, perhaps both. But I don't see a third explanation.
So what can slow that timetable down or reverse it? Is it dependent on the feckless Europeans? Certainly Bernie Sanders has at least been very aggressive in terms of domestic leadership and trying to bring this back to Congress as an example, as well as also saying quite clearly that any type of military exchange with Iran would obviously be an absolute catastrophe. What can slow this or stop this?
Well, I'm not confident about the Europeans. I mean, they were not able to build the spine to deal with a pack of lies around Iraq. I doubt very much that this is going to be any different. That's the one side. Secondly, inside American politics, there's a serious problem. I mean, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, neither seem to acknowledge and appreciate the fact that Iran has the legal right to process uranium. It has a legal nuclear energy policy. Now, I am against nuclear energy 100%. But my opinion is hardly relevant. The United States government continues to develop nuclear energy. France, basically exists on nuclear energy. Until recently, Germany as well. So nuclear energy is a legitimate and legal, procedure, legitimate policy, and so on. And the Iranians, through their membership in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, through their established position with the International Atomic Energy Agency and so on, they have a right to nuclear energy. And they are processing around 4.5% of uranium, not even close to the 90%, which is needed for a nuclear bomb. But in the US, in US political culture, any enrichment by Iran is seen as illegal. And I think this is the really the nub of the problem. I don't see a Democrat willing to come out there in public and say Iran has a right to process uranium for its nuclear energy project. And unless that takes place, there is no long-term solution to this problem. What gives a country like the United States the right to tell another country what it can do or not do if what it is doing is illegal? This is something that Americans seriously need to think about.